Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to look at some R code to help us with Likert scale data. So what we're going to be doing is using some loops to be able to step through some Likert scale data and produce tables for each question across a series of different covariates, so different categories that we want to divide our answers up by. So the code that I'm giving you is in a Quarto file, but it will work in both RMarkdown and Quarto. So you can just take the code that I have, copy it into an RMarkdown, and it will work just the same. So you can access these files on my website. There is a link below the video. But let's jump in, have a look at our data, and have a look at what we are trying to produce. So let's start with where we want to get to in the end, and that is a series of summary tables. So we can see here that we have some questions. They're just very simply numbered, Q1, A, B, C, D, and I think we've got a question 2 in here as well. And we want to see how these have been answered across a variety of different categories. So we've got gender, department, junior. All of this is dummy data. I'm going to provide it to you on the website. You can click on the link below. So we've got the counts, and then we also have the percentages here as well. So let's jump over to RStudio and have a look at how we do this. So as I said earlier, I'm doing this in Quarto. We have a QMD file. But all of this code will be identical if you want to do it using RMarkdown instead. So let's take a look at our data. We can see we have an ID column, gender, department, and whether someone is junior or not, all there as strings. And then we've got some components of question 1, some components of question 2, and all of those are just on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. So stepping through our code, the libraries that we are using, or the packages, tidyverse, cable extra, and janitor. So the cable extra and the janitor are the two that allow us to work with tables and produce some nice HTML tables. We read in our data. It's just a CSV file. And then just a little bit of setup. So I'm going to create a variable here, cats, and that's just going to have the names of my categories. So that's just grabbing columns 2 to 4, so gender, department, and junior. It's just grabbing those names. And then the questions, again, just grabbing the names of the questions, and they're in columns 5 to 14. So you'll be able to reuse this, just altering the column numbers to correspond to the categories and the questions of interest. Here I set up a vector which just has the labels that I might want to use. So rather than 1 to 5, this data is a strongly disagree to strongly agree scale. So we've just set up that for some use later. If your data had been recorded not with the numbers, but with these already, then one thing you'll need to do is set the order of the levels. Otherwise, by default, it will treat them as alphabetical. And so if you need to do that, we can just use this line here. The hash means that it is currently commented off. This piece of code will not run. If we remove the hash, then this will use lapply. And basically, it's just going to go through those different questions, so Q1A through to Q2D, and it's going to set the levels equal to these in that particular order. So it's quite a handy one if we are dealing with Likert and we need to set the order of those, or really any categorical variable. If we need to set the order, that is one way we can do it across a number of variables at once. Okay, so coming down to our main part of code, a couple of important things. First one is we want this results as is, and so that means that because we're doing a bit of messing around down here with HTML, if we remove that, then what we'll find is that we get the HTML code rather than the HTML formatted table. We've then got two for loops. The first one steps through the questions, and then within that, we're stepping through the categories. So we'll start with question 1, and then we'll loop through our 3 different categories. And then it'll go to 1b, it'll loop through the categories. Then it'll go to 1c, it'll loop through the categories. And then we've got quite a bit of code here. We don't necessarily need all of this, but I will step through. I'll tell you what each bit does, and for your particular scenario, you may choose to remove some of it. So we start off by grabbing our data set, and we are using the table function to do the cross-tab. And the way that we are referring to our variables is using what we call a verb. So we have .data, and it's going to grab our category, so the cat, from this that we're stepping through, and then the QS, which is the variable where the for loop is stepping through the different questions. And so that's just a really nice, convenient way. We don't need to worry about any other indexing. It's just going to grab the categories one by one, questions one by one, as we cycle through the loop. A couple of things that I've added here just to be explicit. It doesn't actually matter for my data, but often it does matter. So show underscore NA is false. So I don't want to see categories, the NA categories, and sort equals true. So that's just going to sort our variables. If we've specified an order to them, it'll sort them by that order. Otherwise, I think it'll be alphabetical. We can take that out. It has defaults that it will do. The next couple, in fact, the next 4 rows here, it's just setting a little bit of formatting. So we've got this adorn totals. So do we want some totals on our cross tabs? And I've included the row totals, but not the column. So we can go comma, col if we want the columns as well. But the rows is going to give us the overall results. So not only are we going to get the breakdown by category, but we're going to get the overall, assuming we're not missing any data. We've included percentages, so we want row percentages, so we can see which percentage in the various different agree, disagree. Formatting, we want our percentages to be to 1 decimal place. And then here, where do we want the numbers relative to the percentages? And we've said front. So that means it's going to give us the number and then in brackets the percentage. And we can change this if we wanted percentages. We can also set it so it only has the frequencies as well. So if we took out adorn percentages, we would just get the frequencies. We then use cable. Digits equals 2. That's probably actually redundant in this case. I just tend to leave it in there by default for when I'm working with other kinds of data and putting it into tables. But the next 2 are important. So caption, it's going to put the caption above the table. And so here we are just going to put in the question number and then the category we're looking at. So that as we scroll through our HTML file, we will be able to know exactly what's in that particular table. And then our column names. So because the data was just 1, 2, 3s, 4s, and 5s, I'm using that q.levels as my column name for my table. If I take that out, then what I'll find is that the columns will be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead. And for you, that might be fine. But this is how we can add some column names. And so then we've got our styling, and basically this is just some things with the HTML. We want it to not stretch across the whole page, and we want it to adjust its size depending on how big the content is. Not super necessary, particularly if you're just doing this for exploratory analysis. But again, I thought I would just include it as something that I use quite often. And then finally, we've just got print to print this before the loop cycles through again. So that's pretty much all there is to it. We can hit render and it will hopefully run through for us, and it did. So we can see there that it is producing question category by category, the breakdowns. We've got the totals at the bottom. And so it's just a really, really nice, handy way to keep our code fairly small but be able to produce a whole lot of tables within this loop. So all this code is linkable on my website. Make sure that you sign up for the newsletter while you're there. Also, if you found this helpful, please subscribe to the channel. You will get notifications whenever there is a new video, which is becoming increasingly regular with videos looking at statistics, data analysis, R, Quarto, and probably a little bit of education in there as well.